On this episode of Survive and Thrive 8791 from the Buck and Honey's remote studios, I'm joined by Caleb Frostman. Caleb opens up about losing a governor-appointed job under public scrutiny and the challenges that followed. He shares how staying busy, exercising, and serving as a community helped him cope and rebuild after losing a role he dearly loved. Tune in for this inspirational story of mental toughness and fortitude. You won't want to miss this episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What is up? Wherever you are, whatever you happen to be doing, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to another episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Decora. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios on the east side of our great capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. You can follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube at Survive and Thrive 8791. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, the big X at Decora 8791, as well as hitting me up on Facebook at Tim Decora. I'm in it for the likes and the follows, by the way, Caleb. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or like button wherever you listen to the show. Leave me a comment if you liked what you heard. If there's a topic or you know a guest who would love to tell their story, email me at tdecora@gmail.com. Glad you could join us today. Our mission is to share stories and conversations that make you cry, laugh, and think, stimulating emotions, creating laughter, and inspiring the mind. A new episode will air on Monday and Thursday morning, featuring a wide range of guests. The podcast will touch on many subjects such as grief, loss of a loved one, recovery, professional setback, divorce, success despite challenges, etc. Our guests will share how they learn to survive and thrive. Episode and guest intro. Here we go. According to the internet is always right, correct?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There we go. The economic impacts of COVID-19 have been devastating. Unprecedented unemployment and economic losses had occurred. For example, the U.S. lost some 22 million jobs in March and April 2020. Wisconsin itself dropped 407,000 jobs, almost 408,000 jobs from February to April during that time. The U.S. gained many of those jobs back over the course of several months. The net effect being that as of December 2020, the U.S. was still down 10 million jobs from that February. And that's going to be part of our episode. Today, I welcome Caleb Frostman to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Born in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and raised in Green Bay, Caleb grew up one of two kids raised by his single-parent mother. Caleb was a graduate of Green Bay East High School and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Caleb would wear many hats in his professional life. However, his favorite hat to wear was the one in the elected office of state senator. I'm so glad you could join us today. Caleb Frostman, what is up?
Tim, I'm glad to be here, man. The temperature's not up, I'll say that much, but we're here.
Today, it's really, really cold.
It is nasty. Yeah, we're at 1 degree, 2 degree, somewhere in there.
My wife always says, guess what the temperature is? And this comes from planes, trains, and automobiles. 1.
Sounds about right.
Somewhere in there, yeah. Let's see. We wanted to share a little banter here, and we're going to talk about the weather, which we did. School is canceled tomorrow. We're shooting this on a Monday. School is canceled tomorrow. And what was your favorite thing to do on a snow or cold day up in Green Bay?
I did a lot of shoveling, which was not my favorite thing to do, but did a lot of shoveling, a lot of climbing. We live next to a grocery store, so the snow plows would build these giant mountains of snow. So lots of climbing those mountains. And then I was football obsessed, whether I had friends to play a game or not. I was usually outside tackling snowmen and jumping in the snow with the football.
Well, being born and raised in Packer country, that doesn't surprise me at all.
No, I was completely obsessed all the way through, I'd say through high school for sure.
Yeah, when you started talking about the snow, King of the Mountain came, King of the Hill came, King of the Mountain came into my brain. Also digging into those big mammoth snowplow hills, diving into there and just digging tunnels.
Oh yeah, I think I got my leg stuck on a giant snow boulder one time and was freaking out that I was going to get taken down by a snowplow, but a neighbor came and helped. That was fine. Nothing happened, but I was pretty freaked out.
What are your thoughts on our Green Bay Packers? I had a guest on last week, good friend, and he rambled through and So what are your thoughts? I'm throwing this at you.
Yeah, I think I try to remember we're a young team. No one expected us to be in the playoffs 2 years in a row after Aaron Rodgers, and I am bummed that we can't seem to, win these close games. We're in it, and so, we're competitive, and I wish we could be a little better in those clutch situations, but I'm grateful that we're making the playoffs. I'm hopeful we can continue to capitalize on this run, but it's harsh losing 2 years in a row in the first. Well, we actually won a game last year. So making the playoffs twice in a row, remembering we're young and that we've been pretty darn spoiled. So I'm trying to stay calm and stay grateful.
Yeah, we talked about with my buddy last week. The last 2 years, we've been the youngest team in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And then he also brought this up too. He's a hardcore, looks at stuff on the internet and reads papers. And he just said that I think we got ahead of schedule.
Yeah,
with
right.
Rodgers and Favre coming in, it took them a year or two before we made the playoffs. And lo and behold, J-Lo gets us into the playoffs like almost immediately. How were the holidays?
They were great. Spent a couple days in Green Bay with my mom's side of the family, and then saw my dad and brother and nieces in Stevens Point for a few days, and then went up to the North Shore of Minnesota for New Year's. So they were great. My family's, a lot of them have moved outside of the Green Bay area, and so it's smaller than it used to be, but it was really nice. It was good.
It was, were you good this year? Did Santa deliver?
Yeah, Santa delivered, and I think I was able to deliver for friends and family. So I think as we get older, it's probably more time spent together than it is about the gifts, but definitely I think I got this sweatshirt. So I'm rocking that. Feeling good. Yeah.
That's always on the Secret Santa list is, what do you want? Packer gear.
I pack her hoodie for my sister every year. I ask for it and she delivers. So I can't remember if this is 23 or 24, but definitely from Annie for Christmas. No question.
Awesome. Because you have some great content today, and that's why I have you on the show, is you're a great polished speaker and storyteller. I want to get to your story and how you've maintained your great guy demeanor ever since I've met you. And I don't remember exactly when it was. Probably it's got to be 7-8 years, somewhere in there. But you've always come across as, and then we talked off air a little bit about, my thoughts on you and what you do in your program. I really love what you do. But before we get to that, I need to talk about our sponsor. Our sponsor, Buck and Honey's Restaurant, is a place that people can escape to. For me, it's a great escape from cooking supper. With their great food and drink menu, 5-star customer service, and a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere, people keep coming back. With locations in Sun Prairie, Monona, Waunakee, and Mount Horeb, most communities in the Dane County area can get to Buck and Honey's within 10 to 15 minutes. Drum roll, please. Have you been to Buck and Honey's before?
I have a couple times.
You have. And remind me again, what were your favorites?
The last time I went, I got the Korean short ribs, and they were awesome.
Korean short ribs. I had to grab my tongue there for a second. My mouth started watering. And we talked about, if you ever get an opportunity to go there next time, try the Bomber's special. Bomber is the father of Buck and Honey's, Tom Anderson. Bomber is his dad. And he went by Bomber and Bomber Special Pizza. I've been eating that since the mid 80s when I was just a young little toddler kid, maybe a little bit older than that, but good stuff. I'm going to talk about just a review here quick of how we tell the story and et cetera on the podcast, the recovery story definition. And I follow the format of what was it like, what happened, and what is it like now. We will cover what was it like and what happened in segment 1, and then what is it like now, and then your suggestions for thriving in segment 2. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds great, man. Looking forward to it.
Okay, segment 1, what was it like before, and then what happened? So we'll touch on that before we take a little short break, and then we'll come back a little more and touch up on that and get to your suggestions. But you were born in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, kind of in the middle of the state. And then I believe you said at about 3 years of age, you were essentially then raised in Green Bay, where you would graduate from Green Bay East High School. Tell us a little bit about Caleb Frostman's family. Go ahead.
So I was born in Stevens Point, and my parents got divorced when I was 4, not long after my sister was born. My dad had a son from a previous marriage, Shane, so I have a half brother who's 12 years older. And so my mom and sister and I moved to Green Bay, where her family was from, in 1989. And I grew up there, both on the west side, then later the east side. And my mom worked in the nonprofit world. She was the executive director of a battered women's shelter and then was the CEO of United Way in that county. And so she was a great example of leadership and, giving back to one's community. That was a big part of our family. And I feel very lucky. I'm really grateful that my extended family was there. So my grandparents were really involved, and I had aunts and uncles that were very involved, and cousins. So we were really close, my mom's side. And I got to see my dad every other weekend and on holidays. So I was pretty close to his side too, considering we weren't in the same city. But I feel very lucky that my family was wonderful and, almost kind of like Norman Rockwell cliche, like Sunday family dinners, really nice holidays, drama free. And so I feel extremely lucky that my upbringing was, a really positive one with involved parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents that were just wonderful. So I'm very, very fortunate in that sense that I have, really positive memories of growing up in Green Bay around both sides of my family.
Sounds like a family of service when you talk about the United Way and battered women's shelters. And it takes a special kind of person to do those kinds of things where they might not be thinking about themselves, but they're thinking about others. And I see that in like I said, in your program, because I've seen it up close and from afar, and I can tell that you've had some great role models. Tell us about growing up in the shadows of Lambeau Field. I think that I talked to any of my friends, relatives, name a place that you would like to live on planet Earth, and a lot of them would say, in the shadows of Lambeau Field. Go ahead and hit that one.
Yeah, it was fun. My mom's side had season tickets. I went to a lot of Packers games growing up. My first house is probably a little closer to Lambeau than my second house, but I mean, that 95, 6, 7 run when Favre won his 3 MVPs, I went to 5 games a year those 3 years.
Oh boy.
Which was pretty cool, including the San Francisco Mud game, the NFC Championship against the Panthers. And so, yeah, I was football obsessed, and my high school was where Curly Lambeau went, where Jim Crowley of the Four Horsemen went, and our football coach was kind of this cult of personality, and everyone, loved him and loved playing for him. And so I had just this, football obsessed mind, and, all the way through my senior year. And it's funny, everywhere we went, people assumed every Green Bay high school would be green and gold. Like, well, there's 4 of us. We can't all be green and gold. And we were, red and white. So these teams in Wauwatosa or Lakeland were surprised that we weren't green and yellow. But it was a, football obsessed town. Didn't have time for the Brewers, didn't have time for the Bucks. It was all Packers all the time. Maybe get a Badger Bowl game in, but my emotional bandwidth was totally consumed by Packers football for 18 years.
I know, again, we've talked off air before setting up the script. You talked about the parade going by your house and some high fives. Have you washed the hand yet since Gilbert Brown?
Yeah, I was, so I grew up on the east side, which is not that close to the Lambeau Field, but when the Packers had their Super Bowl 31 parade, the bus went down my street, which is Webster Avenue. And I'm sure I high-fived other Packers, but I remember distinctly high-fiving Gilbert Brown. And I think Reggie and Brett and Mike Holmgren were in like a heated fire truck. And so they weren't out getting high fives, but I remember getting a high five from Gilbert, which is pretty cool.
The gravedigger.
He was a big man. He had the Gilbert burger too, which when I got my braces off,
yes.
It was a triple Whopper, double everything, no pickles. And I remember my one wish my braces came off was getting a Gilbert burger, and I got that.
I love that story. After high school, you would take your talents to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and earn a degree in business administration with a major in real estate and urban land economics. I don't have this. We joked a little bit. I don't have this in my notes, but I'm like, what in the heck do you do with that job? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks that get that degree end up in development or in finance. And at that time, 2006, 2007, banks were still doing pretty well in commercial real estate financing, including in the commercial mortgage-backed securities market, CMBS, that was made famous or infamous, I guess, in The Big Short. And so that's kind of who was hiring when I was graduating. And I applied for a couple different jobs in Chicago, one in New York, and then one in the Twin Cities with M&I Bank, which was who ended up hiring me in my senior year.
Yeah, and you talked about some of those fellas that graduated or you were in the same classes with that landed really big time jobs in Chicago and New York, and you were a little envious, but you had mentioned that in that 2006-7 when things started to plummet, here some of those guys are in renting for lots and lots of money without a job and having to try to figure out what to do. And in hindsight, you ended up being a little bit better by taking a job in Minneapolis. You would have two jobs, one at M&I Bank, which I'm a little bit familiar with, but then became, you said BMO Harris and now BMO, and then US Bank, which sponsors the stadium up there, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yep. How did you like being a Packer fan in Viking territory?
It was okay because that first year we played really well and Favre was still with the Packers, and that 2007 season we made it to the NFC Championship game where we lost that kind of second ice bowl against the Giants. But then it got tough when, Favre came to town with the Vikings. That was insufferable because he was great and they were really good and beat us twice. But I would say there's far more Packers fans in Viking country than the alternative. There are very few Vikings fans, it seems, in Wisconsin. So I was among a lot of friendlies, a lot of Wisconsin transplants, a lot of people with just common sense that, of course, gravitated toward the Packers. So for the most part, it was good. 2009 was really rough, but for the most part, it was, not the worst place to be.
That's the most common sense I've had in a long time.
Yeah.
Probably like 56, going on 56 years.
Yep.
You might as well just be a Packer fan.
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go backwards a little bit because I found this a little bit interesting, that my vision of looking at a bank, M&I Bank or US Bank or any bank in general, is you're trying, the president, the CEO, whatever, who owns the bank, is trying to make money for the investors, make money. And sometimes that takes a lot of hard work. Maybe you got to be not so nice. Maybe you got to be a little hard charging. You got to push people so hard that they don't want to work for you. That is the complete opposite of what you just told me earlier. You said you had some really good bosses. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I did. And I think my first job at M&I had a boss by the name of Mark Johnson, who was the same age as the hockey Mark Johnson, both from Madison, I believe, but a different Mark Johnson. And he modeled such, I thought, excellent leadership through the great financial crisis and just was able to see the big picture and take care of our team and, sacrifice, spend time away from the office, helping the corporation. And so, later on, I certainly became a little disillusioned with corporate America, but I saw incredible examples of selfless servant leadership that really set the bar for what I expected the rest of my career from the leaders I was around. And I had another team lead / boss at US Bank that had a really similar approach as far as, taking care of one's team and being a servant leader and kind of seeing the big picture. And so I had two great examples of leadership in, like you said, could be an otherwise not so rosy place to be in corporate America. And so I feel really grateful that, I didn't necessarily expect to have such strong examples of leadership, but my two bosses at those two places were just great.
Yeah, that's so good to hear because, like I said, it paints a different picture for me about the banking industry, finance industry, that I probably see it on TV or somewhere else, and it's portrayed differently, but you portray it completely different, and it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of leadership styles out there. I am more of a proponent of the get along with everybody, get the most out of everybody, and sometimes you just got to be a good guy to be able to do that. A move from Minneapolis to the Door County area would lead to a career in politics. You move back to Door County, I'm assuming to take another job. You'll touch on that a little bit, but you eventually were elected to the first Senate district in kind of an emergency, I think you called it, special election. Can you, for those of us that don't know what that is, can you just talk about that briefly?
Yep. And so when I left the Twin Cities to go to Wisconsin, part of that was a thought that I could be of service in a public capacity somewhere down the road. I didn't have any designs to do it super quick, and the job I found was really interesting and stimulating in economic development. And so I thought I'd be there for quite a while, but then about a year and a month or a year and 2 months into my new job, the sitting state senator resigned to take a position with the Walker administration. And I'd been talking to people about this plan that someday I'd be open to running for office locally or statewide, whatever made sense. And they're like, well, how about now? I was like, that was not expecting to do it quite this fast. And so I, thought about it long and hard. And it was a really difficult decision because I really liked the job that I had, and they took a chance on me when hiring me. And so I felt really loyal to that board and to that community. But I felt like I could have a bigger impact using public policy and lawmaking versus the Economic Development Corporation, which was doing great things. And I'm proud of the work we did there, but I felt like it had a bigger impact in state government. And so I took this leap and ran, and I didn't sleep a minute the night before I announced, and I didn't sleep a minute the night that I announced. I went like 48 hours with no sleep, just freaking out about this giant decision. And it ended up being, one of the best decisions I made, and had a really wonderful time running for office, holding office, and getting to meet some really cool people.
Well, you must have did something right, because you would run in that special election, you were elected, but then the regular election came around and you lost. But something sometimes comes good out of something maybe bad, in that, oh, dang, I lost and I wanted to win. But something good came out of that, and you were appointed, or your work was recognized by the governor at that time. Governor Evers recognized you for the work that you did and appointed you to the workforce development. Finish that out. Workforce development.
Department of Workforce Development.
Okay, yep. Department. All right, yep. Go ahead. And so you were appointed, and you now then had to make the move from the Door County area, which is a beautiful area.
Yeah, gorgeous.
And then you moved to Madison. Was that the journey, kind of?
Yep, I split time for about 5 months. I was renting in both places, which is expensive. I was renting in Sturgeon Bay, and I think officially ended my lease there and moved into a new place in Madison around Memorial Day. And so I made the move down in May. So I was working, I'd probably do 2 weeks in Madison, then a weekend back in Sturgeon Bay for those 5 months. And it was tough, because I had just, after maybe 2.5 or 3 years of being in Door County, established my roots and my community there. And so it was really tough to uproot again and make the move to Madison. But even on, what was a pretty, I think, adequate salary as a secretary, there's just no world in which I could afford to rent in both places. And I didn't have family money to plow into a house in either place. So I had to make the choice to, be in Madison. And, that was hard to believe that five years ago, almost 6. Yeah, almost 6 years ago, which is wild. It does not feel like that long ago.
So that was in 2019.
Yep.
Okay. And then you're appointed and COVID comes, or word was starting to leak out that there's this thing going on in China, Far East, and it's going to work its way here. And eventually, we don't know what's going to happen. And all of a sudden there's the complete shutdown in March. And then you came under the spotlight of the public eye. And that's what we're going to talk about after in segment 2, because what happened there is something that maybe you weren't necessarily prepared for. You were wearing your favorite, kind of one of your favorite hats. You were in politics now, and you were getting appointed by the governor to a pretty nice gig. And you were living in Madison, Wisconsin, and things were looking up, I'm going to guess. But before we get to that, I want to get to our sponsor. And then we'll get to that in segment 2. Buck and Honey's has been with Survive and Thrive, the Survive and Thrive 8791 podcast since the very beginning, with 4 locations in the Madison area. One is always near. Very much like you have done in public service, Buck and Honey's gives back to the communities that they serve. With a great food menu, 5-star customer service, and a welcoming atmosphere, one is always close by. In January 2019, you would be appointed as the Secretary of Department of Workforce Development by the governor. In segment 2, you are going to talk us through what it was like to be in the public eye for Caleb Frostman, and then ultimately what happened. Those of you that are listening, please stay tuned. Don't change that dial, because you don't want to miss segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. We will be back.
If you, a loved one, or someone you know is experiencing a physical, mental, or emotional crisis, there is help and resources out there. Contact NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline, at 1-800-950-6264. This is a free service providing information, resource referrals, and support to people living with a mental illness, their family, providers, and the public. United Way 211 is available 24/7, 365, and offers free confidential assistance. They connect people with the local programs and services that can help. Dial 211. Emergency crisis services, dial 911. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, dial 988. To connect via web, chat, visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Along with those numbers, there is help. You just need to say 3 words. I need help. Now, back to the show.
We are back. Welcome back to segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Tim Decora. The podcast is where I feature guests who share their story in hopes of helping others who may be struggling with what life throws at them. In January 2019, you, Caleb Frostman, was appointed by the governor to head the Department of Workforce Development as the lead guy. Workforce Development Department. What did that entail?
So DWD has been known by a couple different names over the years, but it's essentially the state's labor department. And so we've got a couple different divisions. They oversee unemployment insurance, workplace discrimination, workers' compensation, workers with disabilities, making sure they can be in the workplace, and then employment and training. So it's a pretty wide-ranging agency, and being the secretary, you essentially want to make sure you can help that agency enact the governor's vision for workforce programming and labor priorities within the state. So it's a cabinet position, and you've got to build a team that can help you enact the governor's vision. And so it was a pretty interesting, heady time, and didn't sleep much the first few months, and luckily I was already bald, but I'm sure I would have lost hair had I had some at the time, but was already fully bald by 19, so by 34, no worries.
I was just doing the math there. So you graduated from high school in 03. 19, you're appointed by the governor, which I think is a pretty cool deal. Mm-hmm. And we referenced this in segment 1, that you were gaining some attention for the work that you were doing. At 34, it looked like you were on the fast track for maybe some bigger and better things, depending upon how things would go. But a little over a year later, something occurred in all of our lives. A little over a year into your appointment, and at the start of the pandemic, in which a lot occurred. And we talked off air, and you reminded me of so many other things that I think we forgot, but then it all comes back to us. Things didn't go as expected for anybody, anywhere, especially you. And at some point in that time, and maybe you can go through that timeline a little quick there, is you were asked to resign from a position that the governor had appointed you to. And we won't touch on that, but what were some of the things that didn't go as expected for you?
Well, mainly it was that unemployment insurance wasn't being paid out fast enough. And as you mentioned, the numbers in the beginning, it was a catastrophic level of unemployment in a matter of like weeks or months. And as has been well documented, our infrastructure at DWD was not equipped to handle that level of claims. And the laws were written to be extra complicated, to slow payments. And so it was kind of this perfect juggernaut of months and months of frustration building, and claimants being rightfully really anxious financially about paying bills, paying rent, paying mortgages, paying health costs. And so it was just building to this head as this backlog continued. And we had made projections that the backlog would be cleared by a certain date, and it wasn't, because the volume had continued. The volume didn't really slow down as people weren't going back to work through the summer of 2020. And so it was a very frustrating time for a lot of people. I think tried to keep the claimants top of mind, and treat their needs first and foremost. But it was a really stressful, challenging time for a lot of people. And like you said, it was the same time of Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, civil unrest in Kenosha, the disease itself. So it was a really stressful couple of months.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine trying to keep everybody's focus on their particular jobs when they've got all of these things going on, and it was one and then the other and the other, and then ultimately nobody could do anything during that time, and you're expected to work and perform at a high level when you got all of these distractions going on, and even the most focused person probably had a tough time getting things done because they were dealing with unfocused people that were so caught up in all of these other little things that were going on across the country. So you're asked to resign. Now, this is the point in the podcast, listeners, where you want to grab a pen or paper and start jotting some of this stuff down, because Caleb Frostman's got that great guy demeanor. And for him to go through, resigning underneath the public eye would have probably done a lot of things to other people, but it didn't affect Caleb like I thought it would. But he is here to tell us about some of the highs and the lows. What did that lead to as far as your mental well-being in the public eye, and you're asked to resign? How did you navigate that? What were your feelings like?
Yeah, well, I think initially, the call came on a Friday afternoon, and I had like an hour to write a resignation letter. And so at that time, I was really most concerned about, not letting my emotions get the best of me, to try to keep an attitude of, gratitude and be honest, but also, don't say anything you regret that it'll be in the papers forever. And so I just kept it, thank you so much for this opportunity. I wish the group the best. I wish you the best. And I'm really grateful that was the headspace I went to. But it was a pretty disorienting experience. Not that happened, because that's kind of what secretaries are for, is to be, insulative for the people that are elected. And, not to say that my work was perfect by any means, and not to say that I expected to have a friction-free rise to whatever I wanted to do in politics. But suffice it to say, it didn't go, even before the call, it didn't go the way I'd expected or really wanted that to go. And so it was disorienting, and I was kind of untethered for a bit from reality, and just kind of up was down, and I didn't...
You were on an island a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you and I mentioned that kind of pre-talk, was just that a big part of the challenge was that you're so isolated, like literally from working alone at home to avoid catching COVID, and then also, to have work of that significance and that import, that much pressure, doing, 3, 4, 5, 6 interviews a week with TV and radio about why things are going so poorly, and then to be, essentially in your apartment by yourself trying to figure that out. I was really... turned upside down, and I was aware that this would take some time to work through. There was a little bit of relief that I wasn't going to be in that pressure cooker anymore, a little bit of anger, not a lot of sadness. Sadness kind of came later as I kind of fully digested, what all this meant. But I just kind of felt the need to stay busy, so I stayed outside a lot. I exercised a lot, and plugged into different communities that I had, that I wish I had invested in more prior to COVID, but I'm grateful that I had some communities to kind of plug into. But yeah, it was very disorienting, and I felt pretty untethered, definitely cynical, definitely a little bit bitter for a while, and just didn't feel like I kind of knew what was going on for a bit.
Mm-hmm. I have in my notes, and you have a different wording for this, and I want you to talk about that as well. As you would find some relief by going outside, doing a ton of stuff. You tried to keep an open mind. You wanted to avoid that self-pity as best you could, but I said you found some relief amidst this bump in the road with some of the 5 suggestions, but you said it wasn't a bump in the road. It was more traumatic. And talk about the traumatic part of it.
Yeah, I think maybe it's most easily articulated by like how my brain worked afterward, where I didn't trust as easily. I didn't think that things would work out well, no matter what it was, that there was going to be some hidden agenda or some sneaky maneuver that would, eventually hurt me or harm me. And so I felt, distrusting. I wouldn't say paranoid, but definitely on shaky ground for whatever it was, whether it was another job interview, whether it was a friendship, whether it was just thinking about the world in general, was pretty shaken. And like I said, also just felt like the walls of the cube of my reality were gone. Like I felt like just really untethered from how I thought the world worked, and how I thought, people communicated, and just felt very, for lack of a better word, very disoriented. Really felt like didn't know up from down, and kind of had to recalibrate, and I knew that would take time. And I think maybe I thought that just time would heal, and I knew that it would take some time, but definitely, it's not just time, it's doing stuff in that time in order to heal that allows that time to take effect. But I was trying to be patient, keep an open mind, and just be outside, keep moving, and give it some time.
I'm listening to you talk, and I was going to interject a couple of times, but just I can feel kind of your feelings, and going back to 2020, you were projecting those on me, and I was going through those same emotions with you as you were talking through that and listening. And I think people need to hear those kinds of things to give a context to how you were feeling. And some people would say that's probably a pretty low feeling. But what ended up coming out of this is you stayed that you still have that great guy demeanor. And I think it goes back to your upbringing with your mom being in the public service, in the public spotlight, doing some of the stuff she is of service to her community. And you saw how she did that, and you stuck to some things that helped you. So this is the part where we also start to talk about some of the suggestions that you have. 5 suggestions to thrive after being appointed and then asked to resign from what I think is a very good job. That you were appointed by the head man of the entire state to run this department. These are the things that you said that helped you get through that tough time, survive, and then now have led to you thriving today. So here's what you shared with us, and I always say I'm gonna toss them in like underhand softball style. I'm gonna let you go ahead and swing away. So the first thing you said was, ask trusted folks for help, professional and otherwise. Go ahead and hit that.
Sure. I mean, I think when I look back on maybe regrets is a strong word, but I wish I would have built a stronger community before this happened. I was of the mind that this job could be my community. This job could be my identity. This job could be my way of being of service to people. And I didn't build out other areas of my community. And so when this happened and we were all isolated, I had a lot of work to do to build that community that could support me. And so I did reach out to the friends that I had and some of the trusted confidants that I'd made along the way. And, I tried, I think, to do a little bit of online therapy that, late 2020, and it wasn't a great fit. Used BetterHelp, and it was not a good fit for me. But then I did find a professional coach that would give scholarships to people that were out of work, and it was a family friend. And that ended up feeling like more of a therapist relationship, but he was great, and I got a lot out of working with him. But I've kind of told the folks along the way that I regret not building that community or keeping that community before something bad happened, because it just takes a long time to build that, and it's really invaluable when you go through something like this. And I didn't really have it built out to where I would have liked it to have been.
Okay. Number 2, keep your body moving with exercise. And I know you like to be outside doing some other things, but I also know that you like exercising too. We've had that conversation before. Go ahead and hit that.
Yep. So at that time I had an apartment gym, and I've always been big into lifting since like freshman year of high school, not setting any records, but enjoy the time under tension. For me, it's kind of meditative. It's one of the few times I'm in the here and now and nothing else. And the endorphins that come from breaking a sweat, that was a healthy outlet for me. Like I said, I didn't win any bodybuilding meets or any powerlifting meets, but it was a really important way for me to find some meditative me time that wasn't just stewing on what had happened or what was coming next. And even now to this day, if I go a week without exercise, I wonder why I'm squirrely and why I feel down and why I'm focusing on the negative. And it's like 1 or 2 half an hour break a sweat workouts can turn my world right side up. I mean, it's really amazing. And so that was a really nice touch point for me during that tough time.
Yeah, being a former phy ed teacher, I like when people reference the importance of exercise. I know when I get up in the morning, I don't always want to do the 3 things. I know I have to get on a bike, stretch abs, get on the rowing machine. I look at the rowing machine as being the last and thinking, I'm just going to do the first 2 but all of a sudden you talk about it in endorphins and things that happen in the body, and all of a sudden I'm doing the rowing machine when I didn't want to earlier. So I'm glad you talked about that. Get outside as much as feasible. And that was probably easier said than done during COVID, but I know you like to be outdoors, so go ahead.
Yep, I've been a big hunter since I've been 12, and so being outdoors is kind of spiritual for me. And at that time, and to this day, I think it's just as much about being out and being in the pursuit and trying to get better at something. And it was a really healthy distraction for me to be outside in the woods, in the prairies, in the marshes, stinking like marsh muck and breaking a sweat, trying to find a deer track, and like all that stuff was just a great way to keep me moving. And maybe it was avoidance. Maybe I was out there avoiding thoughts that I didn't want to have or feelings I didn't want to have. But as far as avoidance might go, that's probably one of the healthier ways to, distract oneself. And so I was outside a lot that fall. I didn't have, I think I got a couple deer and a couple geese and a couple ducks, and just was outside and really happy to be out there and be, again, kind of like lifting, being in the here and now. It was somewhat meditative to, be where my feet were at and not stuck in my head.
A little vitamin D doesn't hurt as well.
100%. Yeah. And it was a really pretty fall too, so that helped.
Being willing to take a lateral or slight back step to get back into the game. Go ahead.
Yep. I think of that professionally. And one of the folks that worked for me at DWD had mentioned that sometimes when things don't go the way you want to, that, taking a step back is not the worst thing. And so my next role out of DWD was with a small family business with some friends of mine. And that was a really cool experience with some great friends. And then that was a commute of an hour each direction every day with a lot of nights and weekends. So it wasn't very sustainable. And so I ended up going back into corporate America. And I would say that was a lateral, maybe slightly, I was definitely a step ahead of where I was the first time, but a lateral step. But the work-life balance I have there is great. I get to be part of a team that I like. I do relatively interesting work. The paycheck pays my bills. And so it's not quite as, dreamy as, running for state senate or being a secretary as far as, life goals go, but it allows me to do the other stuff that, can walk my dogs and tend the chickens and spend time with my fiance, Emily, and do stuff that is, enriches my life in other ways that, is not just my job is my identity and my job is my life. I get to, enjoy life outside of work.
And the last one was find a way to be of service to your community. And again, I think this comes from having that role model to you at a young age. So go ahead.
Yep. So I was became a big brother for the second time in July of 19. And so when I went through this in 2020, I was a big brother for, a year and a half at that time. And so I was able to spend time with my little brother outdoors and, building that relationship. And then I'm pretty active in the recovery community. So I was able to, take phone calls and be of service to folks there. And again, I don't think it's necessarily unhealthy avoidance, but it was a nice distraction and a productive distraction to be focused on how can I help someone else versus poor me or, loathing or wallowing in self-pity. I could be, active and interested in other people's well-being. And it was a really, I think, healthy way to get out of myself during a time that was tough.
Man, what an episode. Knowing you for as long as I have, you are one of the nicest dudes I've met. And I truly mean that. Under less than ideal circumstances and in public scrutiny, you could have left the area. We talked about that earlier, but have stayed, remained, and have thrived since. Your story, I think, will help anyone who might find themselves in the public eye, whether it's in the public eye of the state like you were, in their county, city, neighborhood. Your story is going to help other people think about some things that they got to do when they're going to go into that particular position, or they might find themselves in a position that you were in where you were asked to resign and have come through and thrive since. Your strength to share publicly with the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew is an inspiration. And now your story, I think, will help others. Our call to action. Caleb Frostman just shared an experience that our listeners can learn from. These 5 things can help you or someone you know survive and thrive just like Caleb did as a public figure. Those 5 things were: ask trusted folks for help, professional and otherwise; keep your body moving with exercise; get outside as much as feasible. Be willing to take a lateral or slight back step to get back into the game and find a way to be of service to your community. And you maintain your sobriety through that whole time and that whole situation of COVID and the job moves. You've maintained your sobriety, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as we close another great episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, are there any final thoughts, Caleb?
No, I appreciate the invitation and the forum to be here. And this is my first time ever talking about this publicly. I kind of didn't take as many interviews post life in politics. And so it's been cathartic and helpful to kind of articulate what was helpful and what wasn't coming out of a tough situation like that. And hopefully it is helpful to someone else to, hear some tactical, practical ways of getting through a tough time. And some of the stuff I would not recommend, the isolation and some of that stuff. So some wins, some losses, but hopefully it's helpful for the listeners. And I appreciate the opportunity to kind of synthesize some thoughts that I've had for a long time, and hopefully they're helpful.
Yeah. And as we were talking, I could sense at a couple of moments where you were talking about something that occurred, and as soon as it left your mouth, I saw your shoulders kind of relax a little bit, like I finally got a chance to say that. But really, like you said, what you said on air today is going to help somebody. It truly, really is. And like many guests that I'm going to have on the show, there's several different layers to you. And we're going to have you back again. So the platform is always here for you. But I want to have you back to talk about you getting sober at, I think it was 19 or 20 years old, which is unheard of probably in the state of Wisconsin. There's probably count on one hand. I think there's probably more, but I want to have you come back and talk us through how that worked out for a 19 or 20-year-old to get sober and then stay sober and then have a huge curveball delivered to you some 15 or 16 years later that would have pushed somebody else in the same position without a strong backbone and strong morals, probably would force somebody to pick up and use, whether it's alcohol or other substances, or to not be strong mentally like you were during that whole time. That's why I wanted to have you on, because I think it's an inspiring story, plus the fact that you are here today and thriving. On our next episode, we will have another amazing guest in the Buck and Honey's remote studios who will share how they survived and thrived. If you have a story to share or you know someone who does, please reach out to me at tdecora@gmail.com. Until next time, hang in there with whatever you happen to be going through, and with hard work, dedication, and determination, you can survive and thrive. Until next time, take care.